Shabbat Shalom. Our parsha this week contains a really, truly impressive variety of content. Our Eitz Chaim Torah commentary describes this variety pretty simply as miscellaneous laws. In other words, our parsha contains an extraordinary array of fascinating topics, pretty much all of which lend themselves to in-depth study. Now, the one topic that caught my attention the most this year appears at the end of our parsha and is a special section that we read before Purim on Shabbat Zachor. It describes Amalek, the enemy of the Jewish people. This year, studying our parasha this week, I remembered being at shul on this same parasha many years ago at the B'nai Israel Jewish Center in Petaluma, California. I was just beginning to get to know the rabbi there, Rabbi Ted Feldman. In time, he became one of my beloved teachers. And as we studied this parasha, he explained to the congregation that he refused to read aloud from the Torah the section about Amalek. And he explained his reasoning. When he himself was in rabbinical school, he had a teacher who interpreted the Torah's instruction about Amalek very literally. This teacher read the pasuk, the sentence from the Torah, Timche et zecher Amalek mitachat hashemayim, blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven, and interpreted it to mean that if he met Amalek on the street, he should kill Amalek, because this was his Torah obligation. So my teacher, Rabbi Feldman, was repulsed by this. And to show his objection to this instruction and to this interpretation, he refused even years later to read it. Now, this experience happened to me many years ago, but it left a lasting impression. And with this background, I looked at this selection from our parsha with new eyes and with a new perspective this year. Who exactly is Amalek, and why is the issue of Amalek a matter of life and death? Our parsha speaks about Amalek without giving background or context, just beginning, remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt, how, undeterred by fear of God, he surprised you on the march when you were famished and weary and cut down all the stragglers in your rear. Therefore, when the Lord your God grants you safety from all your enemies around you, in the land that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, you shall blot out the name of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. The Torah's commandment to us is fairly straightforward. Once we are safe in our promised land, we must blot out the name of Amalek, so that even though we remember what Amalek has done to us, the name and memory of Amalek even existing is lost to the world. In other words, we must strike down those who struck us down, and we must do so with an overpowering force. While the problematic nature of this statement is sinking in, we might realize that our parsha still hasn't answered the question of who is Amalek. Rabbi Professor David Golinkin of the Schechter Institutes in Jerusalem enumerates the history of our identifying Amalek with various other peoples. Many rabbis, including Ramban, identified Amalek with the nation arising from our patriarch Jacob's twin brother Esav. Esav was also called Edom, and Edom became Rome. Thus, in this interpretation, Amalek is the people of Rome, the Christians. Now, differently, and in a fascinating way, the Gaon of Vilna identified Amalek as the people of Germany, and he did this long before the Holocaust. As we might expect, in the 1930s, many rabbis identified Amalek as the Nazis, and Rabbi Joseph Dov Soloveitchik and Rabbi Irving Greenberg, among others, assert that anyone who hates the Jewish people is the seed of Amalek. On the other hand, some rabbis have claimed that Amalek no longer exists. Some say that Amalek was wiped out completely in the days of King Saul, which is a story that we read in the Haftarah of Parashat Zachor each year just before Purim. Still others say that Amalek is mixed up among the nations, unfindable, that the heritage of Amalek has already been lost. Yet other rabbis, most notably Rambam and the Sefer HaChinuch, disagree, saying Amalek is still in the world and we still are commanded to blot out their memory. The Sefer HaChinuch states every Jewish male has the obligation to kill Amalek and to destroy them from the world if they have the power to do so, in every place, at every time, if perhaps he finds one of their descendants. Now, this explains why my teacher, Rabbi Ted Feldman, was so disconcerted about his teacher's adherence to this commandment. It would be literally possible for his teacher to finish teaching class one day, encounter Amalek on his commute home, and follow the instruction to destroy Amalek from the world, taking human life in the process. Wholeheartedly, I agree with Rabbi Feldman that we should not go about the world carrying the obligation to take human life, even if that human life is Amalek. For us in our day and in our time, Rabbi Soloveitchik's and Rabbi Greenberg's understanding of Amalek is most illuminating, that anyone who hates the Jewish people is the seed of Amalek. Unfortunately, encountering Amalek by this definition is an experience that most or all of us has had, and probably we have had these encounters more than once. So, when we personally meet Amalek, when we encounter hatred of our people, what should we do? We can meet Amalek, we can encounter hatred of our people when we least expect it. I was reminded of this earlier this week when I finally saw for the first time the film Barbie. Quick sidebar, my husband commented there's enough in that film for several droshes, and I think I agree. But it happened that I saw this film this week after studying the Parsha and then continuing my study by reading extra articles about Amalek and anti-Semitism. So I'm not trying to give anything away, but there was a particular moment in the film that took me by surprise. It was in the middle of a sequence of jokes about oppression of women, which I did find quite funny. There was a joke about anti-Semitism. And while I understood intellectually that the joke was funny, I found myself unable to laugh. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying the joke was making fun of Jews. The joke was making fun of hatred against Jews. The power of the joke was that, like anti-Semitism, it appeared seemingly out of nowhere. And distressingly, the power of the joke also is that it went completely unaddressed, as if anti-Semitism, when it occurs, is something that humankind is just supposed to tolerate. Clearly, anti-Semitism is something we cannot tolerate. We cannot walk through the world prepared to take human life in the name of destroying Amalek, but we also cannot walk through the world ignoring the reality of anti-Semitism. Professor Karen Stoiner of the University of Passau in Germany is the coordinator of the Research Network on Racism and Anti-Semitism in the European Sociological Association. In her essay on intersectionality and anti-Semitism, she explains that anti-Semitism positions Jews outside all traditional definitions of race, class, ethnicity, and nation. As all these categories are defined, the Jews simply don't belong in any of them. She writes, we have to understand the banality that in anti-Semitism, everything can be interpreted against the Jews, particularly that they do not correspond to the socially prescribed categories. In her teaching and in her research, Professor Stoiner's work aims to blot out the name of Amalek from under heaven. She explains with remarkable clarity and persistence how anti-Semitism attacks Jews from all places on the political spectrum, always coming back to the mistaken belief that there is no place for Jews to belong. Rabbi Professor David Golinkin has a slightly different view. He asserts that, especially after the Shoah, there is no way we can read the psukim from our Parsha and understand them as an instruction to destroy the people of Amalek. We know deeply that working to destroy a people, any people, is wrong. Rabbi Golinkin looks back at our parasha and draws our focus towards the phrase, Lo Yareh Elohim. The people of Amalek did not fear God. Because Amalek had no motivation to refrain from evil and instead choose righteousness, they attacked us when we were wandering through the wilderness, just having escaped Egypt, when we were tired and hungry, and even then Amalek targeted the weakest and slowest and most vulnerable among us. Rabbi Golinkin teaches that we must learn from this story, that we must erase the memory of Amalek by doing the opposite of what Amalek did. We must protect the stragglers in our midst, the weakest, the slowest, the most vulnerable. And we must do this so that anyone around can see our righteous action and say, surely there is fear of God in this place. Surely this place is a place where evil is not tolerated and righteousness reigns supreme. Professor Stoiner and Rabbi Golinkin speak towards similar aims, but come from vastly different perspectives. Rabbi Golinkin is an American Israeli rabbi of the Masorti conservative movement. one of the many Israelis who are religious but not part of the far right. Professor Stoiner studies intersectionality and feminism, in addition to racism and anti-Semitism. She sees how persistent and how varied hatred can be, and she works in a realm where fear of God is not always a motivating factor. For us, we must learn from both of these teachers. Rabbi Golinkin writes that some learn from the story of Amalek that we must hate certain groups, so we, in our day, must emphasize the opposite message. We must protect the stragglers so that all who see may say, surely there is fear of God in this place. Now, Professor Stoiner models for us a technique that is coincidentally also modeled in the film Barbie. When you see the truth of the bias, the hatred that exists in our world, call it out. Give voice and clarity to the reality of what's going on and why it's wrong. So the next time we encounter Amalek on the street, we should not let them pass by unnoticed. We must stay safe using the power of our community networks to locate and identify acts of hatred, and the power of our own clear speech and the force of law to call those who hold hateful beliefs to account. And we must protect the stragglers in our midst, recognizing that although not everyone fears God, we can make the choice to behave in a way that might inspire onlookers when they see our righteous actions. Shabbat Shalom.